Good evening, everyone. So as a British fintech startup, expanding into Europe for a couple of years now, we know how difficult it can be to enter a new market, okay? Understand differences in culture, differences in regulation, differences in communication. And so once you've decided to enter a new market, the question is how, okay? Should you have people on the ground? Should you open a new office? Should you adapt your product? And the list of questions goes on, okay? So that's why with the help of the family, we've put this event together. We've got some awesome panelists. They've got different experiences, different backgrounds, and they're here to tell you their story tonight. But before we start, I'd like to tell you a few words about GoCardless, obviously. So GoCardless offers a digital solution to collect recurrent payments through direct debits, so prélèvement automatique. We've started in the UK, and we're rapidly expanding in Europe. We've got 25,000 merchants in 12 different countries, and we've recently been recognized as Europe's 10th fastest growing startup by Deloitte. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Liam. I'm the brand director at Algolia. For those of you who don't know, Algolia is a hosted search API. We help developers build search into their applications and products. We have 3,000 customers in about 100 different markets. We sell into pretty much every country that has a non-censored version of the internet. We currently power about 1 billion searches every day. And the reason we're here today is we're in the process of ramping up, going from selling into the UK to being in the UK, selling into the UK. And it's a big and exciting time for us.
So before I present myself, you have to guess which one is me. Because I've changed a bit since that picture, thank you very much. Martin de Backer, Managing Director UK Nordics for AB Tasty. We're the world's best French AB testing and personalization provider. We've been around for quite a while, one of the, I guess, cool companies in Paris tech. And we're quite successful internationally, so it's working really well for us. I've struggled with the problem of bringing French companies to the UK, and I say problem, for 5 years, and I worked in the startup world for a little more than a decade, so this is a familiar territory for me. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Pierre. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Side. Side is helping thousands of students in France and in the UK earn money and experience when they need to. So what we do is we connect students or young graduates to jobs they can do in cool companies around them, like his company, for example, Wing, in France and in the UK. Yes.
And me, I'm Edouard Caraco. I'm the general manager of Wing in the UK. What we do, Wing, is we are a logistics startup. We help businesses to ship their online orders to their customers. So what we do is we pick up the product from their stores, bring it to a logistic depot where some siders pack the product, and then we ship the product with traditional carriers.
Cool. So most founders I know, when they start their companies, are asking themselves when to open another country, why to open it. So I'd like to ask you, why did you decide to open a new country, and how did you choose where to open?
Yeah, so Algolia's story is pretty particular, but probably pretty typical nowadays. So the founders started the company at the end of 2012 and immediately started everything in English, which meant that very quickly they were talking with people outside of France, which I guess in 2012, 2013 was less popular, but now is pretty much the de facto decision. After they did Y Combinator in 2014, they flipped the company and opened to a US company in order to take advantage of the giant market that opened itself up to them, and started working instantly in the US and in Paris. So basically, for the past 3 or 4 years, we've had a company where everything we do is a function of how do we communicate well as a global company, how do we operate well as a global company, and things like that. And so from the US and Paris for the past 3 years, we've pretty well handled a lot of markets. Because we've got, I mean, it's a huge advantage to be a Paris, California company. You've already got 9 hours jump, which means as soon as my workday ends, I was just talking with my colleagues as I was walking up on stage, handing off the last stuff. And so it's really tied us over for the first 115 employees. But when you start wanting to go from having customers in Germany to actually being a force in Germany, you have to take that step forward. And so we did something very simple. We looked at our revenue by market and then looked at markets that looked like big opportunities for us. And basically what came up was Australia was one of our top 5 markets, which was an insane thing to realize because we hadn't done anything, period, in Australia. And I think that tends to be the case for a lot of companies where they don't actually, Australia is an insane market where there's a lot of business to be done there. And then the UK was a big market, and we saw that we were hitting a wall because we weren't British. We didn't have nicely groomed but long beards, and we weren't well dressed. And
we'll get to the problem.
Maybe something's changing in London post-Brexit, but last time I went there, they said more beard, less t-shirt. And so we started to notice that we could start a conversation with Marks and Spencers, but we couldn't finish a conversation with Marks and Spencers because we weren't British. And so we wanted to be British.
So AB Tasty, you kind of have the same kind of clients as Algolia. Why didn't you go to the US? Why did you choose to open London as a second office?
Why would you go to the US first is what I'm saying. I mean, it's an interesting story you're sharing there, but for us, we were a French company, and we believe that the stepping stone to the US is the UK. First, you need to conquer the home territory. So hopefully all of your startups will be very successful in Paris and in France, and that's where you need to begin. Unless you have a very particular solution. But we are a SaaS vendor, we're in the marketing space, we do complex integrations. So obviously we need to get started somewhere and we need to build a portfolio. So the idea came from Paris, got started in Paris, we built up a large portfolio, and we perhaps reached a climax where it was time to start looking outside of France. And obviously UK is next, together with Germany, quite often Spain. So that's how we got started.
Cool. So for Side, it was all about being in a very strategic market because France is a great market, but when you want to be a global company or European company, it's important that you have an international footprint. And for us, the UK market is a very, very strategic market in terms of flexible work, agencies. The market share is very, very big there, and we had to win this market to be the European or global winner in our market. So this is why pretty early, because we decided to move right after seed. We expanded in the UK, which was a difficult and bold move, I think, for the team. And also for the performance of the company, because opening a new country is pretty hard. And then operationally speaking, it's important for us to be in London because in terms of sales and operations, when you have to meet your clients, then obviously you need to have people there. Also because it's different selling as a French team to British customers from France. You don't have the proximity with the market, and it's way easier to sell when you have people who are introduced in this ecosystem, because the London ecosystem is a pretty noisy and crowded market. So it's always easier when you have people who know exactly how it works and who have contacts there. So I think that the London market is a pretty big market for everyone in Europe. So it's worth it paying the price to be there to crack the market and win it.
So at Wing, you expanded after 6 months, right?
Yes. So for us as Pierre, the UK market is very strategic. It's one of the biggest market for the e-commerce. So for us, it was super. We really wanted to go there quickly, and actually, it was also due to the fact that. I worked at Amazon in London, so I had a good understanding of the market. And I worked previously with Jean-Baptiste, the founder, who is based in Paris. So based on the team, I think it made the process much easier and quicker to launch the UK market. And for us, I agree with Pierre. As we are a logistics startup, we had to put in place some processes, and so we had to be there. It actually took a few months to to set up all the processes. But yes, we had to be in the UK from the beginning.
So for those of you that could operate remotely first, what resources did you allocate to these countries, and what were the real benefits when you had people on the ground?
Algolia historically, our Series A was led by Excel, so it was a London firm, which gave us a big access to network in terms of opening doors and starting conversations. So I think rule number one is like squeeze your network as hard as you can early. Like we've spent as much time as possible. As we grew up and our founders stopped doing sales, which at some point you switch off of being sales, but at some point you are. We still employ having our CEO go out to deals. Even to this day, he's in London right now, in order to open doors that we think that is the best solution for. And the other thing is we travel. And to this day, we're not currently physically present there. We're prepping a lot of things, but we can't say that we have an office and we can run around and bring people in and do what we do in other offices. And I would say there is someone from Algolia in London at any given moment right now, I think, if not 28 days out of the month.
Not English people.
So Algolia doesn't hire non-Anglophones. So we have people from in our Paris office today. We have people from 15 different countries. In addition to that, we have a rule about travel, which is that we get anyone from any office to travel to a different office at least once a year. So at any given time, you have anywhere from about 5 to 10% of the company traveling. That changes during peak periods. Not a lot of people traveling during Christmas, which is great because I just go home to San Francisco and take advantage of that, and I get the SF office there. And not a lot of people in like late July, for example. But we have corporate apartments in where our key offices are in Paris and SF, and we encourage people to travel. And so because everyone speaks English, our entire sales team, which is based here, I couldn't even tell you what percentage of them are French and what aren't. It's not something we generally count. And so that has made us able to sell into all these different markets. And it was part of this idea of being global from day one is as long as you don't take a decision that can limit your ability to be in a market, you're global from day one. It's not like the internet is limiting you, so everything else is the decisions you make. And so our employee number 9 didn't speak French at all and was a Czech guy who was living in Finland at the time, but he was the smartest person that we'd ever met. And so he was okay to come to Paris, and so we brought him out, and that sort of developed from there.
Yeah, maybe the thing that I want to highlight, especially for a small company that wants to go to the UK, so for Side and Wing, where we went there just after our seed, I think even if you can't operate remotely, there are plenty of stuff that you can do before going there. So I can speak about a lot of examples where actually you go to the UK, but your website is still in English, your internal tool, in French. Your internal tools are not yet translated. Your dashboard is not translated. This was the case for us. This was the case for other startups like Trusk that we worked with, or even Stuart, which is a very big one. I think maybe for us it's still the case. Just make sure that everything that you can do in advance, do it, so that when you are there, you'll have plenty of surprises that will take you a lot of time. Make sure that all the stuff that you can do before, do it before.
So Nicholas at Algolia is still going to London. What do you think about having the founders move to open a new market?
Well, I think in the beginning, it's when it's your first country, I think it's important. When it's the UK or the US, I think it's also very important because these are key markets, and you have a big hiring risk related to opening a first country and just not choosing the right person because it's someone from a different culture, from a different market. So you have less readability on the profiles that you may hire. So it's important that you as a founder can compare your experience in this new country to what you've lived at home. And so yeah, I think it's if you can, it's good. It's better as a founder to at least to launch the country and then set everything up, and then give it to a local team, hire the first key people there so that you keep the same culture also, because then if you open a new country, then you will hire people from different culture because they are from different countries, but you try to create the same atmosphere and on give the same values to your employees. So it's very important that you do this as a founder. It's very hard if you just hire someone remotely to ask this new hire to do this for you. So you are the only one as a founder to be able to do this. So I think it's very key that someone moves there. So we are 4 co-founders, and I'm living in Gaspar, one of my co-founders, and I are living in London, and we have 2 other co-founders here in Paris.
Martin, apparently you're the perfect guy to hire to launch operation in the UK.
You can all take my business card afterwards. I'll be waiting right in the corner.
I can help founders recruit you, or guys like you.
I tend to recruit myself. I present my services and we have a little conversation. But that's just how it happens to be for me. But it's interesting 2 things that were mentioned, I think, are very important here when you do get started. And assuming that you're established in France to begin with, I really like to highlight that topic, that you need a base to stand on. Network is insanely important in the UK. You need to get started quickly. Quite often French companies have a tendency of sending somebody from HQ, which obviously often is a French person, not necessarily familiar with the UK market, how things work. And in my experience, that leads to a very slow, painful, disappointing scenario at some point, where they're at the same time as they're there to produce results, they're learning what works and what doesn't. And there's just this continuous flow of experimentation. Is this the time to experiment? If you're already established and you have a business that's working in France, shouldn't you try to replicate that, but also be sensitive to how things are different culturally in another country? Should founders move to the new countries? I'm not entirely sure. It depends on the founders, I would say. Some founders are the right people to go. They're very international and they speak the language well and they can be there and they make sense. But in order to be successful in the UK, you will have to do it the UK way. And I would suggest that sometimes there are founders that could potentially be in the way, if I put it that way, because they want to do it exactly the way they did in France, which worked. And they'll say, this worked, we've done this before. So we're going to replicate that, we're going to copy that identically and paste that somewhere in the UK. That's not always the right way of moving forward. You need to be very careful when you take people from the French HQ and put them in the UK and make sure that they are the right people. You need to ask the questions. Are they familiar with the market? Do they speak proper English? Can they write a proper email? It's interesting that you only hire Anglophones. It's not a stupid idea. There's probably a reason for it. So that leads me to another thing. Should we always hire British? So is setting up in the UK, is that about hiring English people or Welsh people, Scottish, potentially Irish? Not necessarily, but at some point you will probably have to, because those are the people that are there. There will be your future candidates. But it's also important that they understand, like you mentioned, the philosophy of the company. There are some French, very successful startups that actually take people, let them spend a few months in France to learn the corporate culture, and then they go back to set up the office.
We almost exclusively do that. All of our, we just hired someone in SF who's going to be the Liam of San Francisco, basically, and they're going to start their first 4 to 12 weeks in Paris, which, as it turns out, spending the summer in Paris for a new company is not a hard sell. But it's very useful for whether you hire a French person or a British person, there are plenty of French people in the UK, in London alone, that can navigate the UK system. But I think the most important thing is you want to create something that's cohesive, because if you sacrifice having a cohesive company in favor of it attacking a market, you'll ultimately create an issue that you're going to have to deal with at some point.
So in your experience, is it more finding product market fit in the UK? Is it more about understanding the market there, or also adapting the product?
We've been very surprised to see the level of expectation of British companies that is higher than the French one. So it was important for us also to be in London pretty quickly because having an international product only happens if you actually confront your product to the highest expectations, right? And I think that in London we've reached a point where it may be the highest expectations, which is good, right? Because it sets the right requirements for your product team. And we had to adapt it a bit because we have payment and because we have invoicing in our tools and some legal checks, also background checks to do for the people who work. But otherwise, it was a pretty scalable product. So this was easy. And then translation, of course.
Just wait until you get to America. Expectations, finance,
it's another
legal.
level.
I mean, if I can continue, obviously the UK market compared to France, and I've been here for a few years. I've lived and worked in Paris for a couple of years, so I do have somewhat of an understanding, probably not as good as yours, but it's much faster and it's usually much more competitive. Depending on what you do, it can also be more saturated. So is it about tweaking the product? Maybe. Because what you truly, truly, really need in the UK when you get there, if you do something that is not revolutionary, that somebody has never seen before, and you can really rely on the product you're selling, it's going to have to be about differentiation. So if you're doing something that somebody's already doing, we're doing A/B testing and personalization. There's a handful of really established companies in the UK doing this. We have to do it in a different way. So can we exactly duplicate what we're doing in France all the time? No. But I think that depends on what you're doing and what your solution actually is.
No, I agree with you on this, but also here again, I think the size of the company matters as well. So when you are a small company just after seed, your room for adaptation is lower. So that's why you need to have a very strong market analysis before entering a new market. And I think also it's important that the HQ in France have a fresh opinion of how the market responds, so you can maybe stop quickly, so you don't spend too much money on expanding to a new country, which can be very expensive. It's not only money that it requires a lot of time, a lot of investment from the whole team. So this is also important. So the room of the margin for adaptation, I think, depends also on the size of the company. For us, if I take my specific example, we had to adapt ourselves internally. So of course you need to work with other partners. So your tools need to be adapted, but we wanted to keep exactly very precisely the same service, the same offer, so that we can show that the offer is scalable, and that the UK market is the first market that we can open, but potentially prove that we can open new countries. That's what we plan to do very soon.
So you talked about a bit about recruiting. I know you told me marketing is very, very different between France and the UK. What are the other, I'll let you go deeper on that, but the other big differences that you see that founders have to be aware of?
I mean, if you're not familiar with the UK as a market and the way things are marketed, and this would apply to the US as well, there is a different tone of voice altogether, the way you communicate. Just compare, just search on YouTube for different ads, TV ads. They're completely different in the UK as to what they are in France. And I find that a bit fascinating. I can actually sit here in France and watch ads on TV and be really fascinated. Like, that would never work in the UK, never. And obviously it does here because they've done the research, and obviously they wouldn't keep putting that ad if it wasn't successful. So marketing is one thing, and that will probably be top of my list of things that you will really need to get sorted before you go there. So you need to be sure that you understand how you market, how you communicate in the UK, what the differences are, and that obviously implies that you have somebody on board who knows how to do this. That is one aspect you do not want to experiment with. Let me just point out and make it very, very clear. Translation agencies are not marketing agencies. If you have a beautiful looking website and you have all that collateral, all that content, it doesn't mean that you can give it to a translation agency and they say it's English and you read it and it seems fine. even if it's grammatically correct, the tone is probably awful or just very flat. And your marketing will be your first salesperson. That will be the interface, the first between your prospect and yourselves. Do you want that to come across as dodgy or weird or foreign or whatever it is? This is quite often a problem with French companies going to the UK, because, no offense, but quite often I feel that French people, they're a little overconfident with what they're able to achieve in a foreign territory. And when it comes to English, my interpretation, I can say this as I'm not French, when they speak English, my impression is quite often
do I hear a bit of a hidden message here?
Absolutely,
No?
absolutely.
No, okay.
It kind of is, I get the feeling that quite often they feel that they can do everything because they speak English. But if they don't speak English, they don't want to do it at all. And probably they do speak a fair bit of English, but they just don't want to engage because it's embarrassing. It's like my French, it's truly awful. I understand almost everything, but I don't want to engage in a conversation because it makes me feel funny. But you know, you need to get this sorted, because that is your first sales. That is your sales lead, and that is the window that you're going to have to climb through.
2 seconds. I would just add, I was just thinking about it as you were speaking about translation not being marketing. I actually can't think of a single thing that I would recommend you go through a translation service for your company. That sounds really broad, so I'm sure I'm missing something. But you wouldn't do sales collateral through a translation service, because you wrote that product marketing message yourself and it worked in France, so you need to figure out how to make it work elsewhere. You wouldn't translate your website. Trust me, it's a terrible decision. There are plenty of mistakes that have been made over the history that you don't need to learn that one again. I can't actually think of a single, maybe if you were recruiting in a foreign language. There we go. I can think of one example where you might, but even then, if you care about recruitment at all, you probably would do it yourself. We only write stuff in English, which makes it really easy. And the day we switch to French, we have plenty of people on board to do it. But if we ever want to write stuff in Turkish, we're probably going to look for someone who can speak Turkish and English, so we can have a very long conversation with them about the nature of language to make sure that when whatever they write, it represents us well.
Sorry. Yes, just about sales specifically, and the way to operate. Can't agree more about the fact that it's truly different. Even if we are very close as two people who like each other and who are close geographically, it's completely different. For example, in France, the way we do sales, we do it via emails or via calls, and people respond because they have free time and they're quite curious, and you're a startup, and it's pretty cool. But in the UK, I've spent maybe 3 weeks sending 100 emails every day, because I just replicated what we did in France, and you have zero response, except for just, I'm sorry, but I'm not interested. And you do cold calls, but people don't pick up the phone. And so after 3 months, you're like, okay, so no one wants to talk to me, no one responds to email, no one picks up the phone. How am I going to sell? And this is when you are very happy to have British people in the team who explain how it works. Because the difference is that the market in London is saturated in terms of sales, and it's a fraction of what it is in the US. But when you give a message, it's like when you go to a quiet bar in Paris compared to a very loud pub in London, and you're trying to give a message. In London, you can try to scream as hard as you can if no one knows you, and if you're not connected to companies, you can't close a company. And it's actually it may be discouraging, but you shouldn't be discouraged, because we've tried so many times to close some companies we really wanted to close, but we didn't know anyone there, so we spent 2, 3, 4 weeks on this account, and the answer was no, not now, we're not interested, etc., etc. And we hired someone who knew someone in the team of this company, and they just had lunch, and 3 days after, we just closed the company with the first job. This is crazy. This is how it works, because it's like, okay, I have so many options that I'm going to choose the one that someone recommended to me. So I think it's, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think this is how it works in London. So networking is very important because there are so many options, and as you said, there are so many options for everything we do that you need to be connected to the right people in order to have intros and to close companies. So it's not as easy as in France.
How do you scale that? Is it the brand that you create that enables you to open the doors later on?
I mean, I think network is something you can scale, but I think network is just, it's the same thing in every market. It is network. It's just how that network spreads is different in every market. I think, in the same sense, like every network operates the same in the sense that it's all long-term relationships. If you have an interesting thing to say, you can start a conversation. That sounds like a really basic sentence, but now apply it to doing business in a market you're not active in. Do you have a story you can tell? We are an A/B testing solution. Here's what we've done with Galeries Lafayette. Did you know you can do this, which just so happens to be your unique product differentiator from Optimizely and the 19,000 other people that are trying to talk to that same person? Now you have started a relationship with someone. And that operates the same way everywhere. The people that I built relationships with over the last 7 years in London, you don't necessarily know why you're going to need them, but you can pretty quickly figure out that someone is a connector. And I think the most important thing you can do is start tomorrow, meet people who are visiting from London to Paris, make yourself available and meet them, and make it known that you would like to meet people from London coming to Paris, and find opportunities to go from Paris to London. For example, the Europas is happening today or yesterday, one of the 2 days, which is a London event. Go to that event and meet people. Is it a ridiculously expensive event to go to? Yes. But every single one of those people can connect you to 100 other people, and that is not necessarily something you're going to see dividends on in 3 months, but that kind of network relationship pays off because eventually you meet the guy who knows the guy who runs the company that you're trying to sell to, and then you go, oh, well, that was obviously worth it all along. If only I had known that 3 years ago when I had a beer with that guy who was introduced to me by someone else because we both happened to be in Lisbon at the same time, or whatever the thing is. The story that I was going to say, which for me sums up my London experience, is last time I was in London, which was a couple months ago, I went to get lunch with a friend who I'd met through another friend, of course, both British, and we went to his preferred private club. You know, you need your own card to get in? This still is a nightmare to me to imagine, but it's the pinnacle of British society is to tell the person which club you are a member of. So we go to the club member thing. I have to say his name. They know his first name and his dog's name and everything at the door. We sit down, and he has invited another friend, and she comes over, and she's complaining because her club is currently under construction, because clubs go under construction, so she has to go to a partner club. She has to go to the Royal Automobile Club. Have you heard of this? The R8. It's a pretty good one, I found out. And she's really upset about it. And so I'm curious, and I'm trying to understand this club culture, and so the lunch goes on very long. She's a founder, he's a founder, yada, yada. And finally she says, well, I'm actually going over there to do my gym workout networking session or whatever the thing is. And she says, do you want to come? Because you can pass the membership on and have someone come in. I go in to what I can only describe as the pinnacle of the British Empire. I swam in an underground pool that was lined with like a chandelier made out of, I'm just going to assume is orphan tears. I don't know what it was, but it looked like a lot of pain turned into a lot of wealth. And that is the pinnacle for me of British networking. That can translate down to Old Street, where you go to the Googleplex thing and you network with people at the coffee machine, and you don't know why you're talking to that guy working on his laptop, but you looked over his shoulder and the thing he was looking at was cool, so you talked to him, and that ends up being a lot of the UK market. I don't know specifically how that can help you attack the UK market tomorrow, but I can tell you at some point you'll have a moment you'll be like, oh, that's what he was talking about, and it'll all come full circle. My point is, all networks generally operate the same. Build quality long-term relationships. Don't go into a discussion where you're in an unknown environment with a fixed agenda. Go in with 5 opportunities for success. I make money from you. You like what I'm doing, so you introduce me to someone else. We keep in touch for the long term. Whatever that, or I hire you, whatever that happens to be, go in every new conversation. And then the other side of that is get someone who knows what they're doing so you don't have to do that, because that takes freaking forever and you're never going to get to the UK if you're the person having to do it. Go hire someone who makes your company better because they're better at that than you. I think I just pitched your job.
So quickly, just tell us the biggest mistake you've made going abroad so that they don't do it.
I think the biggest challenge that you have when you are a small company going abroad is actually the first few employees that you get. So you need to be very, very careful in the first employee, because it's going to set the tone. So be careful. Do you want to hire some French people? If you hire some French from the beginning, then it would be impossible to recruit some English people that will feel alone, especially with a strong accent like mine. Thank you very much. It will be tough, so make sure that you hire very precisely at the beginning. So that is, I would say, the main challenge. The second challenge, I mentioned it quickly before, but just do as much work as possible before going to the market, because it can really prevent you from growing quickly, and it's actually quite expensive to have another market. So make sure you spend this money wisely, and yes, and choose the market as well smartly.
Yeah, I agree. And I would just add, like, don't replicate the same sales technique. Really adapt to the local market. Talk to a lot of people before you go, so that you understand the channels, and you already get connections in potential clients and circles, because this is how it works before you get a big brand. And it is, I mean, I know it's hard to believe, but as Liam said, is very how it works. So try to build this before you go, because then you'll have much more traction once you're there, if you have already built a strong network, and travel there and meet people, because this is how you're going to really launch your company in the UK when you're going to do this. So.
Just one other thing when it comes to preparation and actually doing sales. Mistake, I wouldn't call it, but one thing that I felt like I've learned. Nobody likes a presentation. Nobody wants to listen to a presentation. Nobody wants to see your slideshow. And the more you've rehearsed it, the worse it is. Because it will be so rigid, it will be so fixed, and you decided what's going to be said there, and it's probably well scripted and all of these things. A conversation can be very good sometimes. Your presentation is there to support your argument and maybe illustrate some points. But you need to be able to present your thing in a context, even if it's 20 people sitting in a boardroom, just walking in and the computer just broke down. I have nothing to show you. You have to be able to deliver there and then with just the insight, the knowledge that you have and the passion that you have. Also, I mean, the UK is a country where the definition of humor is a man dressed in a dress. And, you know, where they go on the royal ascots and stuff, it's all very quirky and strange. Put on a show. People love a little bit of entertainment. I think what works the best is actually the thing they expect the least. It has to be good, but where's the magic?
Do you have an example?
I can't tell you, that's a professional.
Put on a dress. Of course, clearly. Stick to the basics. Fall over. Rake in the face. I'll come back to that's a little cheating, but I'll come back to what I said, because my rant was long enough for 5 questions. Hire people who make you better. Don't maintain anything. This success in a foreign market is not being there. Launching is not the success measurement. It's not filling out the paperwork or getting the office space or even finding the person. Success is your foreign market outpacing your home market. That's the only measure of success. England is a larger economy than France still, sort of. We doing okay? Okay. I don't know. I don't follow foreign currency exchange. You. Let's be honest. Me, really, but that's a different conversation. Success is that, right? You don't go to a second market to have a secondary market. You go there to have it outpace growth to the point where you go, wow, what is that doing so well that we're not doing, right? That's what success looks like in London. It's where you take what you learn in London and make everything you do in France better for it. So go with that mindset. only bring people into that who see that as success. And whether you hire people or send someone over, we've done both. We sent our CEO to SF, and we've hired people in new offices. Hire people who are going to jump the first 70 hurdles without blinking an eye, because the next 70 are infinitely harder, and they need to make your business better because you pick them and not anyone else. And that would be it.
You look like you wanted to add something.
Maybe what I can add on this is make sure that the decision maker in the UK share the same incentive as you. So it's important that they are interested in terms of shares. Good salaries are higher in the UK than in France. So if you want them to work the extra mile, make sure that you treat them well, because the market is very competitive in the UK. Finance jobs tend to push the salaries up. So this is also something that you need to take into account before going there. Employees will be expensive. Life is expensive there, and so make sure that you treat them well.
So that's been the issue for everyone, salaries?
No, we have a pretty transparent salary option. Anyone in our company, for good reason, can go to any market and get their salary switched over to that given market. Mostly happens between Paris and SF. It's just a fixed cost, like how much is rent. You don't really think, that's just what it is to do business there. I think you definitely don't want to expect to pay anyone a Parisian salary in any other market that you should want to go to. I mean, the number, not the actual money that you pay as an owner, which is ridiculous, holy crap, but I mean the number that they see. You should expect to multiply salaries by 2, by 1.7, by 1.5, depending on where you go. But other than that, those are accounting issues more than anything else.
Just one thing to keep in mind: salaries are higher in the UK. That's true, but again, cost of life is higher. I mean, the membership to the Royal Automotive.
That's not free.
Yeah, that's you need to have a salary to pay that. But the employment fees, the taxes on top, so the national insurance contribution, that's 14% in the UK, generally speaking. What is it in France? It's an absolute fortune.
97%.
Yeah. So you look at the total cost, and it's not as bad as you think. It might actually be quite interesting.
My question is, do we need to already be strong on our own country, I mean about the market size, before to go to another country? If I'm launching a service here in France and Paris, do I need like to be not a leader but a major actor on the market before to move to London, or can I just go and see if London will be like probably a better market for my business?
Before he tells you that the answer is yes, I'm going to tell you the answer is no, just so I can get that in first. Honestly, like, what is being a major actor? Like, what percentage of the market, I'm using you as an example, I apologize. What percentage of the market does AB Tasty have today of the total addressable market size?
It's pretty freaking big.
So says you. Honestly, it really depends on the solution you're building. Like, when you start a business and you open a website, you are a global business. So what about your business restricts you to a market? If there are enough things that make you market sensitive, like you handle accounting and finance, where it's gonna be a bigger investment for each market, it makes a little more sense to be comfortable. If what you do is like TransferWise, and by nature is international, you should probably be in multiple markets from day one. If TransferWise started and said you can transfer money from like London to Bristol, it probably wouldn't have been as successful as if it said Estonia / the euro to London, right? So it's really something you want to look at. If you feel like, if there isn't obviously I'm not going to have time to deal with that thing which takes up all of our time if I go there. If you don't feel that thing pulling you down and saying like there's a huge market opportunity at home, I need to be here, then why wouldn't you? Like, is one client in one place worth less than one client in another place? No. Does it take the same amount of time? No, there's a barrier to entry. But if you haven't already figured out that like there's a huge market opportunity in France that you need to crush right now, then go wherever you want.
I need to defend myself now. And I will do so by saying that I agree with everything you said. Yeah. It depends on what you do, and I think that's it. There are strong advantages in starting global in a way, because you can pivot and you can see what is truly attractive on a global scale. When it comes to us, just sharing our experience, we knew that our industry, our little niche, was very saturated, very competitive. So we need to have a mature solution to present. We cannot go there and say, yeah, we're just trying this out, because they will literally kill us in 3 weeks. So we need to build on the tool, we need to build on the market and all of these things, and when we're ready, we go. But I don't think that should be the case for everybody.
Yeah, I'm not sure it depends on the actual size of the market. I mean, how big you are in the market. I think it's important that you have the good motivation to move to another country. I think that there is no point in being small in 2 different countries if your business is not transnational. Maybe focus on build and reaching your product market fits in your home country. When you are there, think about expanding. But I think first thing first, make sure that your product is well developed in your home country before moving to another one. Especially again I don't know about you, but in the typology of company that are a bit small, use your money wisely. The money that you raise, use it wisely. If there is a very big interest for you to go to the UK, consider it. But if it's just going there to, just make sure that your motivation are good.
Yeah, because be careful. It can really jeopardize your business, even kill it. Because if you raise a seed round, let's say 1 million, then how are you going to allocate this money? And going to London is going to cost you money. So instead of building traction or growth in top of your growth in France, then you'll have to start something from scratch, probably make mistakes, and it's going to cost a lot. You're going to open a new office, hire someone. At first it's not going to work, then you have to adapt your product, etc., etc. So there are a lot of extra costs that actually in the end, when you add everything up, it can really kill your business, because you won't build enough traction in both countries to actually go to the next round. So you really need to think also about are you really sure that you can expand now, because it's very risky.
Oh, okay, so what you're saying, Liam, is like you need to be big enough, because like if you don't succeed on your own market, why are you going to London? And what Martin is saying is, you need like to start your product from scratch, iterate the maximum, create like something which is pretty great, and then launching, then expanding to other countries, right? But in the case of when you're starting to build a solution on a very competitive market, because now we see with the globalization, like when you launch a product, you have 10 people that are launching the same product at the same time, and you don't know why, because you didn't hear about them like 6 months ago. It's it's kind of racing. So the question is, which one of these actors, which proposing like probably very good solutions, each of them is going to succeed first and grow first?
So I think the question's a bit difficult for one reason, which is every single company is going to be different. So the best we can tell you is, here are some variables to consider. I would argue that the premise of this discussion is, assuming you have made the decision to go to the UK, here's what we can tell you. That being said, the first to act sometimes wins, the last to act sometimes wins. There were things before iPods, everybody knows that. Does that mean that you're the iPod? If you have the answer to that question, then you already know what to do. And it always comes down to that. If you've already decided that there is a big giant pile of cash waiting for you in London, no one's taking it, or no one knows how to grab it the right way, of course you should go there. If there are equally sized piles of cash in France and in London or in the UK or whatever, then it's more economically feasible to get the big giant pile of cash in France right now, because you've already made the investment and you have all these passive benefits, like you speak the language, you live here, you know people, your neighbor might be a customer, whereas your neighbor probably isn't a customer in the UK. So it comes down to that. You know the variables that determine success for your business better than anyone else. At some point, you will look at everything that you're doing, and the answer on the piece of paper will say, why are you not in London? It'll look right at you. Or it'll look something different, like it'll say, what the hell are you doing in Paris? Which will raise a question for which the answer will eventually be, why are you not in London? But at some point, your business will tell you, i.e., you will figure it out, that London is a good place for you to go or not? Now, that's not a great answer, but the question is not an easy question. Sometimes. Algolia's first customer was in California, who ended up being an angel investor. And then they applied to Seed Camp before that, and they didn't get in. And then they applied to Y Combinator, and they did get in. So they got a house in Menlo Park, and they brought a bunch of interns from Epita out, and they went and, can you imagine there were 2 interns whose internship during Epita was to go to the Silicon Valley and work in Y Combinator. It's the most insane. One of them is still working on our team. Anyway. And they did that, and they saw the market, and they saw a big giant pile of cash, and no one was taking it. And they said, why are we not doing that? Because it's right there. That didn't mean there wasn't a market that was available in France, and that's why they didn't stop going after France. But they said, if we're not here, we're leaving money on the table. And the business looked right at them and said, this is what you need to do. We also used to be an embedded mobile search engine. For anyone who knows their Algolia history, we used to be a mobile SDK for iOS and Android. And then they figured out that there was some money in that, but there was a lot more money in taking that thing and putting it in the cloud and letting anyone use it. And that's Algolia today. So at some point, your business looks back at you and tells you whether you read it the correct way or not is the reason why places like this exist, to tell you how to read those things. Sorry, that was kind of interesting.
Hi. How has Brexit had an impact on the startup community in London?
Brexit. What can I say? We're yet to see what Brexit means in the UK. I think it's too early to say what the impact will be, really. One thing I personally believe is that UK-based investors are going to look more in France, in Germany, and they're going to find other companies because investing, if it's going to be a hard Brexit, VC activity is not going to stop. The digital economy is not going to stop. It's too big of a country, it's too big of an economy. But obviously it relies a lot on London, and London is full of non-English people. They're full of foreigners. And recruiting talent will be difficult if they don't give assurances. So I think it's too early to tell. It's a bit sad, people are a bit disappointed, but then something else political happens and we talk about that instead. Brexit is a thing, at the same time it's not a thing.
Yeah, at the moment it's very unclear. There is nothing very precise. But what can be interesting is nothing related to Brexit. I think the startup community in the UK is very different from the startup community in France. It's less like cool, fancy, I want to be an entrepreneur. I think in London, the top role is I want to be a banker, I want to work at JP Morgan, entrepreneurship I think is less fancy in the UK than in France. Most of the top universities in the UK, all the best students, they go in banking jobs, whereas in France we can see that it starts to change. So yeah, I think it has nothing to do with the Brexit, but you'll see if you go the startup scene is very different. I don't know if we experience the same thing, but it's what we've seen at Wing.
Did you know that Portugal used to be an empire and they were a bigger economy than Brazil? And Spain used to be an empire and they were a bigger economy than Central America? And England used to be an empire and they were a bigger economy than India? There's a lot of things that change. Big economies change. I don't think anyone knows what's going to happen with the UK. I would argue that what fundamentally makes the UK an amazing place is all put in the air by Brexit. Immigration, which in turn means free-flowing capital, which in turn means a financial sector, which in turn creates a great environment for the advertising industry because there's a bunch of money and a bunch of interest in getting visibility in front of that. Whether whatever happens in the future will change that, I think quite literally the only answer is a hung answer, and that's pretty much the situation right now, is a hung parliament for a hung question with a hung answer. And there's people who are optimistic and there are people who are less optimistic. I mean, I think you can be just as worried about America's president as you can about UK's decision. So There's a lot of really interesting things that are happening. The great thing is that the internet keeps on going every single day. And when people that try to make stupid decisions, sometimes the internet blacks out Wikipedia or blacks out Google to tell them to stop censoring the internet. And it turns out the internet's a lot stronger than an individual government or an individual decision. So very few of these businesses would be impacted by regulatory changes. It might change a percentage of the tax rate that we pay to employ people or bring money back over, some accounting thing that none of us care about because a startup's going to come along and tell you how to deal with Brexit, and you're just going to tap the little Brexit integration and then you're going to be done. And so on the one hand, it won't affect anyone. On the other hand, it might fundamentally affect everyone.
Sorry, do you work with any government agencies like in France or in the UK or the US when you were going in your journey?
Nope.
No.
When we launched the UK business, we discussed with the Chambre de Commerce who tried to help us a bit, but to be honest, they were, I don't know if there is any represent here, but it was not super efficient, sorry.
No, not at all.
Hi, I've got a question regarding international expansion and more general matter. Do you think it's better to do your market research and think that, okay, maybe it's better for me to go in the UK, so I will just put all my energy, time, money, and effort on this? Or should I just start to expand globally, maybe Spain, Italy, Germany, and the UK, and then after 6 months, after 8 months, decide where to go, where to establish a new office, where to recruit people, maybe recruit some market specialists, because I think you experienced this kind of thing, and I wanted your opinion on this.
History lesson. Before BlaBlaCar was BlaBlaCar, they were this thing called covoiturage. Anyone ever use covoiturage.fr? Yeah, old poor people. Me too. So in the course of like 3 months, they launched in Spain and the UK at the same time. Of course, under completely different names, because why? And then one night they decided to be BlaBlaCar. My point is, for BlaBlaCar, they realized it was a land grab. The concept of BlaBlaCar is fundamentally reproducible. However, the network effect of having everyone already on BlaBlaCar makes it a compelling product to use. Again, coming back to the Mr. Nice Mustache, his previous question, I think at some point you look at your business and your business tells you, this is where I need to go. If it's a low investment cost to launch in Spain, which I think means translating a website, but it might not even mean that depending on your business. Like Algolia is active in Spain because we work with some of the largest companies in Spain today. But we're not, have we launched in Spain? No, it just turns out that the internet's global from day one. So if those restrictions make it really easy, yeah, throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks. But if you look at your business and your business says, this is the thing that's going to determine your success, optimize for this metric, and the answer to that is be in one market or be in 4 markets or be in 40 markets, that's ultimately going to be the answer. You can be comforted by the fact that almost every company is taking a different approach, and even when they've been successful or failed, none of their lessons are replicable to your use case. But I don't think that helps.
And just if I can add something, just being realistic, just focus, at least open one market at a time. It's already very tough. I don't know what your business is, but if you rely on tech, you're gonna keep asking them to adapt what you are doing. Means having one market is complicated for a startup. Expanding to a new one is complicated. So if you put all, if you want to expand to too many countries at the same time, you're gonna be not efficient in many countries, whereas you should be very efficient in your home country, and if it makes sense, efficient in the country you work to expand.
So every time you should try to make the difference between your strategy and the opportunities you have. If it's Algolia, they're not in Spain, but if a client from Spain wants to sign up, of course they're going to say yes. But they don't have a sales force there. It's not their strategy, and if no one is in Spain actually subscribes, they don't care. Or kind of.
I mean, we'd be a little sad if no one in Spain was using us. But yeah.
Has the label of being a French startup in Britain served as a help or a hindrance? Is it something from both a marketing and a sales point of view that you've used, that have you described yourself as European instead, or is it a myth, like is it just nothing?
I think this can apply to both of us, because for you maybe it's less obvious that you are French. For Pierre and me, it's much more obvious with our accent. I think that the UK market, they are much more rational. They don't really give a shit if you're French, if you're Spanish, if you're... what they want to see is that the service that you provide can help them doing something, can help them save some time, save some money. But being French actually doesn't really work for the business life, for the personal life. Sometimes it can help.
I mean, to put it in a different way, being a foreigner doesn't matter. That's not a disadvantage, especially in London where there's no such thing as a foreigner. You're a foreigner if you're from Cardiff. So, you know, that doesn't really matter. But if your question is, does it add to your business? Is it a good PR vehicle coming from France? Quite frankly, I don't think. No, I mean they don't understand it. It doesn't work. It's like, you know, this is the best sold car in Poland. Okay, great. It's difficult to relate to. Obviously, they know France and they will do that's very funny and stuff like that. But you know, yeah, it won't help you. On a number of occasions, to give practical examples, we've actually tried to rub off the whole French stamp, where there was a lot made in France with love stuff going on when I entered. And it's just, for what purpose are we saying that or communicating on these things? But I think that depends on really what you do. I mean, imagine if you work in fashion or something cool like that. Obviously, that's exactly what you want to do. In tech, not sure.
However, you can still leverage the fact that there are a lot of French people in London, and so it won't help in PR and as a brand, but it can help because there are so many French people that you can leverage the various networks, French networks from alumni, from different industries, and it's very helpful.
And if you don't have a network and you're French, contact all the French people you can find in London and get started. It will help you a lot, a lot.
And also for employees, if you don't really understand how the market works, I think that you can find people who've been living there for 5-6 years and who would actually do the bridge between France and London pretty easily. So it's pretty useful to have this community already in place in London. And I think it's something that everyone should leverage as a French company when launching in the UK.
Thank you very much, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed.
Que la famille.